Welcome to the Smarter Leadership Podcast, where we explore the power of leadership, from overcoming challenges to shaping cultures and building a lasting legacy. Through inspiring stories and insights from our guests, we'll share transformative lessons to help you thrive in today's interconnected world. I'm Tucci Ivowi. Join us for conversations that will inspire thought and action. Jude Addo is the founder and CEO of JA Group, a diversified investment firm with global interests in financial services, technology, real estate, and natural resources. A former banker at JP Morgan and Standard Chartered, he became one of the youngest directors in the latter's history. Jude co-founded a UK-based venture capital firm backing diverse founders and serves as a non-executive director across companies in insurance, fintech, and specialty finance. A Schmidt Fellow, Harambee, and published author, he is passionate about helping people prosper with purpose. Jude, I'm really excited to be talking to you today. What you do is an area of immense interest to me. I've not spent a lot of time in, the area of finance, investment, wealth management. So I'm looking forward to hearing a lot of insights. But I think it'll be great to start by you sharing with those who don't know you what you do so that we can, dive right in.
Wonderful. So by training and extraction, I describe myself as a wealth manager. I started my career in investment banking and corporate finance, and then strayed into the world of wealth management. I guess enticed by the allure of getting close to rich people and learning how they made their money. But in the core sense, wealth management is effectively helping people devise a plan to grow, preserve, and ultimately transfer their wealth so that it becomes transgenerational wealth. Okay. So it encompasses everything from investing, creating diversified investment portfolios, globally diversified investment portfolios. So diversifying away from one's core market. So for example, if someone makes their money in Indonesia, we help them gain exposure to, investments in Australia, for example. So that's global investments, but also things like insurance, life insurance, setting up family trusts, property, financing, and so on and so forth. Okay. It's an entire world.
So your business, is that accessible to individuals or is it just corporate firms? If I wanted to get advice in this area, for example, can I come
Absolutely.
to you? Okay.
So the business is accessible to everyone, but there's ordinarily and naturally there's going to be tiers of service. The wealth management industry historically has focused on the cream of the crop, the top 1% of the top 1%. Okay. And that's actually for good reason. It's just by virtue of the unit economics of the way the industry works. It's a very high touch industry. So it's very expensive to pay expensive briefcase bankers traveling everywhere their clients are going and making sure that everything is done in accordance with your wealth plan, et cetera, et cetera. But over time, you've seen sort of a race to the middle, where wealth management is becoming a lot more accessible to everybody else through technology. And my company, for example, has just introduced a really interesting toolkit, interesting piece of tech called Celery, which is a wealth tech that helps everybody gain access to personalized financial advice from expert financial advisors all over the world, just by a subscription on their phone. Okay.
So we started, you talked about the 1% of the 1% and then talked about how, the industry is finding a way for it to trickle down to the middle class. So maybe it's good that we now talk a bit about the basics. So you have a child today, you want them eventually to become one of those 1% of the 1%. How should they start? So somebody who's looking to build wealth over time and to give themselves that opportunity to really be someone who you can say potentially could become in the 1%, how should they start out?
Well,
so how would you advise your children, or how would you advise someone to start advising their children to start early?
It's a great question, and I get this quite a lot. I mean, the basic thing is financial education, getting your children accustomed to the basics of financial well-being and financial, management. So giving them a budget, for example, helping them understand the way money works, helping them understand hard work, helping them understand the fact that money shouldn't just be there if it's not in use, it should be invested. So these are sort of the basic things around financial literacy that you start introducing to your kids at a very young age. But you introduce a very interesting topic where someone has a child and all of a sudden, every time you have a child, you start thinking about your own mortality. You have a kid, you're like, oh my gosh, what happens if I'm not here? And that's probably the best time to engage a financial advisor because the vast majority of people in the world try to do it themselves and fail. It's so perverse in a sense because the really wealthy people actually get financial advice,
right?
And they don't really need it because you're a billionaire. Like, how much is an extra 100 million going to mean to you? Like, and the people who actually need it don't do it and don't have access, right? And there's an interesting stat that came out the other day that only less than 10% of Ghanaians. I know you have a global audience, but I'll get to other countries. Less than 10% of Ghanaians actually employ a financial advisor, and in the world, the average is something like 30 to 40%. Right. So it's still quite low. But you find that the results that someone gets by having a financial advisor who's impartial, who's independent, who's just doing things based on an accumulation of experience that they've had dealing with many people, and aggregate that data to help provide insights for your personal situation. People tend to fare better in terms of their wealth and investment plan with a financial advisor than trying to do it themselves by downloading an investment app and buying an Apple share.
Okay. So this is 10% versus 30 to 40%. Correct. So we have some way to go.
So
are there some core principles that you kind of have gone by yourself in your own journey or, to build this capacity?
Yeah, I would say there are some core principles. Number one is invest in knowledge, investing in yourself. I remember when I started my career at JP Morgan in London, I wasn't on, everything is relative. But in the UK investment banking world, I wasn't on a very high, sexy salary. I was on a pretty basic salary of about £40,000 a year. And even then, I was spending my disposable income investing in myself, investing in courses, investing in knowledge, investing in networks. And so I think that's a core principle. People are probably the most important asset you'll ever have. Your relational equity is probably the best thing you can use to leverage to then, get you on your way in terms of building wealth. I think that's highly important.
Those two things, knowledge, investing in yourself, your knowledge, education, and then building relationships.
Yes, relational equity is absolutely critical.
Tell me your approach to that. People say that it's good to play golf. You meet a lot of potential clients on the golf course, and because of that shared interest, you can strike deals. I've, been a few times, sometimes at the driving range, a few times on the course, and the kinds of people you meet, it's kind of invaluable. What is your personal approach to this relational equity building?
Yeah, I tried golf. It didn't quite work out for me. My brother loves golf, but I promise I can beat him any day. Golf is quite an expensive sport, so if you're starting off on a pretty basic income, it's probably not the best place to start, although it has its benefits. My approach was literally to find people that I thought were, in terms of upward mobility, were ahead of the curve than I was, and find ways to add value to their lives. So I would find a way to broker an introduction, get FaceTime with them, and ask them what keeps them up at night, and then go find a solution. And if I find a solution, all of a sudden, I'm within their good books. And then business just tends to come quite easily. People like to do business with people they like. It's as simple as that. You might have a great product, you might have a great service, but at the end of the day, if someone likes you, they tend to ignore some of the imperfections and move ahead. So
you don't necessarily need to be a social butterfly. You don't have to go to every event, going with your business cards to look for people and shake hands.
You don't have to do that. People do that, and sometimes it works for them. I'm not the type to show up at every event. In the UK, for example, it was huge on pub culture. So after work, you go grab a pint. I don't really drink. I don't really like the cold. I mean, I'm in Ghana and look what I'm wearing, right? So it wasn't something that I necessarily ever acclimatized to, but you know, sometimes you have to bite the bullet and take one for your future and do certain things that I love what Oprah said. Sometimes you have to do what you have to do in order to do what you want to do eventually.
Beautiful. So when it comes to the topic of capital raising, are there some insights you can share? I think there are two areas that people really look to financial experts for advice. So we've talked quite a bit about, you know, how to be financially literate, the, let's say, approach to wealth management. How about when it comes to looking for money to invest in new businesses for founders, entrepreneurs? Is there, you know, are there some, again, principles, or are there some ways to go about this in your experience?
Yeah, it's a great question, Tucci. Look, I think capital raising over the past, I would say, decade has become this sort of hot topic, you know, because there's been this sort of romanticizing of, you know, venture capital. There's always an announcement. Somebody has raised 10 million. Somebody's raised 20 million.
And probably shows like Dragon's Den and stuff has added to the hype and all that.
Exactly. And, you know, I think there's a perverse culture.
Okay.
The reason for that is, you know, raising money is just getting ingredients into your kitchen. You know, you don't have a chef celebrate and announce, oh, I've just got 5 carrots and 5 cabbages. You know, it's just ingredients you're getting. What we ought to be celebrating is what people actually do with the money, and how it ends up transforming businesses. Most people have now become sucked into that culture to the point where they feel everything is a money problem. Everything is a capital raising problem, which a lot of times it isn't. Sometimes it's simply a capacity problem. And not every business needs to go out and raise money.
Okay.
And you have to figure out which pot of money is the most suitable for your kind of business and for the kind of person you are. I mean, I don't want to bore you with the details.
No, please. I mean, I like what you said, that, you know, for the type of person you are, it's a critical point, and I'd like you to expand on it.
Look, venture capital isn't all as, you know, what it seems to be. You can end up raising a lot of money and realize that even if your company sells for $100 million, you walk away with zero, because you end up being diluted, you know, over time as you raise more and more money. And if you don't structure things properly, you end up being an employee of a company that you founded, and you actually have no equity. So it really comes down to, you know, your ability to perhaps engage the right financial advisor, to look at your situation and determine, for this kind of business and this kind of product and this type of person you are and the type of team you have, it's probably best to go raise money from family and friends, or it might be better to go and get a bank loan, because the kind of business you run is more attuned to debt than equity. And so, you know, there's all sorts of things that people need to consider before they go out and raise some money.
So if you're someone who is happy to kind of keep the pots open and have different people share in your venture, it might be better for you to, you know, give the equity approach. If you're someone who is going to struggle to pay back this, you know, because sometimes it's ingrained in you. There are people who understand debt and understand ways to manage debt. But if you don't have that kind of, let's say, temperament, you should really think the approach. And I think this is an important point, because it's something that people don't think about a lot. It's just, how do I raise money? The money's here, happy. But in the end, like you said, there are lots of horror stories. Lots
of them. Lots of potholes. Lots of crazy obstacles to jump. And to be honest with you, you know, capital raising itself is a sport. And it ends up being a full-time job if that's what you're focused on. And you tend to neglect the core business. I always say the best way to grow a business, if possible, is through internally generated funds. Just bootstrap as much as you can.
Some family, patient capital.
Absolutely. Family capital, patient capital. Get, you know, pre-orders in, use that capital, and then reuse it, recycle it. I mean, going to raise money can be a 9 to 18 month process. And at that point, I mean, who's focused on the business?
Yeah. So that's, kind of raised another point, because often the founders themselves are going to do the job of the capital raise, whereas they may be better suited really focusing on that big idea they have. How do they bring it to life, and maybe engaging someone, whether it's a firm or whether it's a partner, whether it's a future employee, to do that job with them, and then eventually they also get the payout. So I think these are good points, to look at and to think about.
Absolutely.
And now, what are your thoughts on, partnerships in general? What are your thoughts on working with friends, investing in, co-investing in companies? Because relationships tend to be, dicey. A lot of people have experienced, negative, let's say, situations as a result of partnering, but others have really made it work and made it work well. What are your kind of personal thoughts around this? And are there ways to navigate it so that the negative impact can be, reduced?
Yeah, I think I'm probably a full-blown case study in working with friends. Because if you look at JA Group, probably 90% of our C-suite I've known for over 25 years, or probably 30 years, from middle school, high school, college. We've been friends for a very long time. And it's quite an interesting dynamic, because although we are friends and deeply connected at a family level and at a friendship level, we still have the boundaries of business is business. And I think you need, when it comes to working with friends, you need to be able to identify the friends that can compartmentalize a little bit, that know that actually, you know what, this is a line you don't cross. This is business, and you have to respect those lines. And I give myself credit for it. I give my friends credit for it, because also we've known each other for 25 plus years, and they still sort of defer to me because I'm the CEO. And I empower them as well, because, they run their own businesses within JA Group. So I think it comes to heightening your own emotional intelligence to ascertain whether these friendships are robust enough, and their temperaments are robust enough to deal with that tension between friendship and business. And
I'm glad you mentioned that, yes, you're the CEO of the group, but you've also got this mutual peer-to-peer relationship, because I was going to talk about the role of leadership in that, because if you have multiple friends all working together, there will be some who will find it harder to know where to draw the boundaries, to use that kind of emotional intelligence. But your role as the CEO, yes, must have had a role to play in how you manage with the team. How do you manage individuals? How do you manage the group as a team to kind of keep those dynamics flowing? What's your personal kind of leadership style?
I think my personal leadership style is friendly but firm. So I make it a point that I'm there really as, a sounding board, but I don't micromanage. I make sure that everybody feels empowered to do what they need to do as a leader in their own right, within their own businesses, and they can defer to me if there's anything perhaps a little too complex for them to deal with. And also I make sure that there's, mutual respect and mutual honor. We win as a team, we lose as a team. Nobody's a superstar on the team. And that sort of team building is critical to the way in which I personally manage and lead.
So teams, do you do anything particular to kind of, apart from everything you've just said, are there, team building events? Are there deliberate attempts to kind of forge this team spirit, or is it just the kind of day-to-day workings, how you share ideas and so on?
Yeah, I think I try to refrain from calendarizing what people will call team building events and team building activities. It feels, to me, it just feels manufactured. And it's a way to force strangers to become a team. I tend to defer to the concept of ingraining it into everyday life. So how we treat each other on a daily basis, we just rock up, say hi, talk to one another. Some of us even play basketball on a weekly basis together. It's just, and we have, a weekly team meeting where everyone, no matter your seniority, you get to contribute to the direction of the company. It's just fostering that into everyday life, making it a culture rather than, putting things in place in calendars to, create something that...
Or tick a box.
Yeah, to tick a box.
Okay. You said friendly but firm. And people tend to think that you can be only one way and not the other. I'd like you to share, especially if you have any instances where you've had to kind of display both at once, just for people to kind of learn through stories, through experiences.
Yes, I think it's probably my nature. I've probably always been like that ever since I was a kid. I mean, the immediate experience I can recall actually has nothing to do with my experience at JA Group.
Sure.
Probably has something to do with an experience I had when I was working in the UK.
Okay.
Very early on in my career, I was probably an associate at one of the banks I worked with. I won't disclose. And I think I was filling in for somebody else who got called out sick or something like that. Investment banking floor, corporate banking. And then I wasn't too sure what I was doing, but I was doing my best because I was filling in again. And I think I had made an error. And the MD, who's probably at that time was probably, late 50s, early 60s, at least he looked that way, came out of his office maybe a few meters from me and just in front of everyone, just, went at me. And he says, Jude, I get paid too much to be reviewing these silly errors. Like, literally went at me. And I took it for a moment, and then he walked back. But then I just had this epiphany.
Okay.
And I stood up from my desk, and mind you, he is several
decades
levels ahead of me in terms of seniority. You go from analyst, associate, VP, ED, MD. There's like 4 levels, 5 levels of MD. He was probably one of the highest. So we're quite a distance. And I walk up to his office unannounced, as soon like maybe 2-3 minutes after he had left. And I say, hey, can I have a word with you? And I didn't allow him to even say yes or no. And I just said, I didn't appreciate what you just did in front of everybody. I'm filling in for somebody. And I really deserve a lot more respect, especially given the fact that I'm actually beasting my day job. And then I walked out. And then he later came back and called me in and he says, Jude, I apologize. Needless to say, the next year I got a promotion. But I think that's my approach.
Yes, okay.
I won't be disrespectful, but
it's good to be firm.
It's good to be firm.
Especially in things you believe in. You make your point.
Once you have conviction, just be firm.
Okay. You just mentioned conviction. I'd like to use this opportunity to learn about your values. What values have driven you for the most part of your life?
I would say for the most part of my life, one thing has remained constant. I'm a people person.
Okay.
My wife disagrees, but I strongly believe I'm a people. I love people. I strongly believe in relationships and friendships and family. And it's evidenced by the fact that I've maintained a core friendship group for decades. I think in the autumn-ish of 2008, I had this sort of spiritual experience where it culminated in me giving my life to Christ.
Okay.
And that has shaped my values since then. Obviously, I mentioned my core values from childhood. But over time, I guess those sort of Christian values of, unwavering faith. If I believe, there's nothing anyone can tell me. So unwavering faith, convictions, prayer, fellowship. Those sort of Christian values have been imbibed in me over time. And so that's what I tend to live by.
So do you mix those in your life with family, at work? Is it just kind of...
I'm of the personal conviction that it's hard to divorce, your secular life from your faith life. And so I marry that in everything I do, from my home life to my work life to career to friendships, business. I strongly believe in integrity and honesty. I want people to have firm convictions when they deal with me that they don't even need a contract, that my word is golden.
Okay.
That's the kind of person I am.
Okay.
If I say something, I have to honor it, even if it's a personal loss to me.
Okay. Yeah, that's a deep personal value, and it's a value that I value.
I like that.
Your word is golden. Yeah. Okay. So family life, this also, you've mentioned that as, part of the first values. Is that kind of what keeps you grounded?
Yeah, it does. It certainly does. I have the family that I was born into, inherited, and the family that I made. And when I look at the family that I was born into, I was born into a family which at the time was going through a series of sort of issues that were brought about through some political upheavals.
Okay.
Speaking diplomatically. But so at the time that I was being raised, it almost felt like a single parent household, because from 0 to 6, my father was in exile in the Ivory Coast. And so that period was very humbling, especially going to a school like I did and seeing what, other people were perhaps enjoying in terms of family life, social life, financial life. And that context is very important in my upbringing, because I guess that's what's kept me grounded all the way till now. But also the family that I acquired by marriage is also an incredible family, very similar values, very humble, modest, and that also keeps me grounded.
Okay. So I just came into my family, faith, and finance. That's your world.
3 Fs.
3 Fs.
That's right.
Beautiful. So usually when I am going to interview people, I like to, try to find out as much as I can about the person. But at the same time, I like to discover them when I'm speaking with them. So I that's really a lot of my approach as well. But I did find out that you had, earrings and braids and all sorts of things when you were younger. And, the reason I'm bringing this up is because people think, people in the finance world look a particular way, behave a particular way, have to, are very conservative, are very serious all the time. Yeah. And because a lot of people are looking to the future and how they can improve their livelihoods, how they can build financial literacy, how they can, I'd like to, let us get a bit of insight into this old you, so that people can understand that, you don't have to be one way. And then maybe at the end, we'll just explore some tips for those who are coming up and, budding entrepreneurs, budding finance people. You can give some advice and some tips too.
Okay, so you've opened a can of worms. I don't even know where to start. So, yes, I do have an interesting history. I was a good student, but distracted. Distracted in the sense of music, hip hop culture, girls. The list goes on and on. So yes, I did have braids at one point. In probably I'll say middle school.
Cornrow or?
I don't even know. I don't. To be honest, I don't even know. I think I just went to a hairdresser somewhere in Test, and I was like, "Look, there's a picture of Ja Rule. Just make me look like him." And they did that. And then I go home, and everybody was gobsmacked. And then I think later on in life, even when I went to college in the U.S., I came back one Christmas, and my parents discovered, which was quite bizarre because I was in the house for literally 4 days and they hadn't noticed the earrings in my ears. And then one day, my mom was like, Papa, what should I have somebody here? I was like, and yeah, that was quite a revelation for them. But then obviously post giving one's life to Christ, things just become a little bit different in terms of your priorities, and started focusing more on things that I think mattered. So academics, work, life, fellowship, etc., etc. And that just saw me completely beasted in almost every, probably not almost every aspect of my life.
You give it everything. You just
everything. I just started beasting academically. I was like soaring, and everything was just like it was almost like I was in a rocket ship. And so that's a little bit of historical context. I do have.
So there's a time for fun. There's a time for play.
Even now, absolutely. I mean, I am probably. I love expensive jokes. I'm probably the guy who's poking fun at everybody in the room. I don't take myself too seriously, but I know when it's time to be serious. And I think that sort of balance is important in life.
Okay. So that time to be serious, I know that a lot of people who watch this podcast are really inspired by people's stories, and also look for advice, look for tips, look for, things to look out for in their own journey. So based on your background, your experience, especially in this area of investment, wealth management, are there any tips that you'd like to leave with some of our viewers?
Yes.
And maybe life advice in general. Yeah,
I'll probably start with life advice. I would say life advice is probably a predicate to investment advice. And when it comes to life advice, one thing that's critical for me is just to make sure people are, they build integrity and they're honest. I think that's what leads to building relational equity. People don't understand how important people are. Even in the Christian faith, that it is God who blesses, but God blesses through people. And so no man is an island. You can't necessarily discount anybody's contribution to where you're going to go in life. And so you also have to maintain that perspective and maintain that grounding. When it comes to the financial side of things, I would say level up in terms of your education. Get coaching if you need to get coaching, and don't expect to get things for free. Everybody's always looking for something for free. If you got to pay for a coach, pay for a coach. And there's 2 rules of investing. The first is never lose money. The second is never forget rule number 1.
Never lose money. I think that's going to be a topic for our next conversation.
You're welcome.
So I really look forward to that. Jude, thank you so much for coming to chat with me today.
Thank you for having me.